We are here with Aaron Coombs, who is a faithful member of the Playa AI community. He joined one of our Hatchathons, our OpenClaw Hatchathons, where we kick people off on their AI agent creature. And some absolutely magical things have happened since that inception point. So Aaron, could you give us a little bit of background about how you heard about what we're doing and how you got involved?
Thanks, Alex. Excited to talk. I got introduced to Playa AI via my partner, Abby, who's been involved in the Summit community for a while and connected in. And so she threw out, hey, there's this hackathon around OpenClaw. You might be interested. So I jumped on, dove in, and was able to get, with the support of you and then Rayo, get kind of a framework up with OpenClaw. Didn't really know much about it at the time. Pretty good user of Claude and ChatGPT, but the agentic element was rather new and kind of envisioned like this chief of staff, how can you make my life easier? And so this seemed like a great opportunity to learn, to dive in. And after that, we'll chat through. But it was great to hear the community, what's possible, kind of what Playa AI's vision is, and very inspiring to dive in.
Yeah, and so you took it upon yourself to start building. You weren't really sure what you were doing. So how did you go from that state of uncertainty into direction?
One, I would like to say I'm a very curious person. And, it is a little daunting, right? I'm not technical, don't have a technical background. And so there's a lot of language within this world that I'm not familiar with. But it was keeping the curiosity and just trying to figure it out. Knowing it was going to be probably a little frustrating. It is the early days, so there is the building element, and you kind of make a little, some things up, things change every day, and especially with OpenClaw, a lot of change. And there's historically like some security concerns that is, I think, kind of been worked through. So it was really just trying to learn, about agentic AI, like how do the systems actually work and what's required. And then think of, could I have a use case that would allow me to learn through and try to answer some of these questions? So ultimately, I think that was probably the biggest piece versus just building for building's sake. It was, here's what I'm trying to solve, and then what do I need to learn to get there was kind of the big step.
And so what was that like? Okay, I have this particular problem I want to solve or challenge. What was the first case?
So it was around kind of this idea of the chief of staff agent and what could it do to make my life easier. And one of those elements or capabilities that I was pursuing was how I could better manage my network and stay on top of my connections and my relationships. I'm a big iMessage user, and I am not the best at immediately responding, get a number of text messages. The time of response is very different for a lot of folks. And then there's this feeling of like, well, I should have, I could have, I want to, and life is busy. And so it was, how can I use AI and use OpenClaw to support that and make it just a little bit easier for me to build and stay in contact with the folks that I would like to. And so I said, okay, how do I design this? iMessage is pretty locked down, but I'm sure there's something that I can do. And that was kind of the first project that I dove into and say, how could I do this? Even with the limitations that I was aware of with the Apple ecosystem, but I'm sure something was possible. And so I dove in and then began to build.
Okay, so it went from the chief of staff, main assistant frame into contacts and messaging management as the first kind of project to build. Now, give people some background about you. Like, you're a non-technical person, right?
So background is in corporate sales, marketing, and strategy roles for the last 13 years. I've always kind of enjoyed the technical element. Live in Seattle, a lot of folks who are programmers, et cetera, but just my brain doesn't seem to work that way. And so it was, again, a whole new language. And then as I think about, how do I leverage what I think could be usable, even if it's a very, learned skill. I can converse, like I can write and I can learn. And with enough time, I figured, I could probably develop maybe a little bit more of the technical skill, which would only be a benefit. But I feel like the jump to, you know, the messaging interface and then being able to connect, with Cloud Code and the more technical tools on the background, was something that is very doable even for a non-technical person. So I think that was a little bit of kind of inspiration of what could be possible. But yeah, no technical background, just a lot of curiosity.
Yeah, that's what struck me because I understood right now your main activities or career are revolving around real estate. Previously, Procter and Gamble, big corporate, let's say, in a business role. And then the activities that you've been able to perform technically using just this OpenClaw foundation were really remarkable for me. So why don't we dig into a little overview of what you built? If I can reframe it, it's a tool for helping you manage your friendships, business and personal connections through iMessage, which is traditionally well known as a pretty locked down communications platform. And so, yeah, you want to give us a little tour?
100%. And I think the other thing as we go forward, right, this is one small use case, and it has inspired, I think, a lot bigger thinking in my mind of what's possible as I've learned. And kind of everything is based on data, right? And so if you have your different buckets, particularly within the network and LinkedIn and everything, there's a lot that's possible. So I'd say this is kind of just the initial start, and I hope it is inspiring for others to think of what they can do. But I think there could be some pretty big impact depending on which way you would take it. And we'll talk kind of what I'm envisioning next. So let me go ahead and share. What this is it's actually a web app. And so with Apple, with the ecosystem, you can have an app or a site that's hosted, and you can turn that into what feels like a native iOS app. And so this is all hosted on a domain that I have, and then using OpenClaw, writing the code that's then being hosted on the domain. So both the backend and then the front end is what I'm using OpenClaw to create. And then you can go open
and so
yeah.
Your main interface into OpenClaw is through Telegram?
Yeah, through Telegram. And then we'll get into, a tool that kind of helps me manage that. But it's a lot of chat, which is great because I can be at the desk. I can then, be on the go, and continue those conversations. And then what I would say is I do have a lot of my data and context within a shared folder that lives, both locally and then in the cloud that OpenClaw has access to. So there is core context and like memory files that are on the VPS, so our virtual private server, where the OpenClaw instance is, but then it can connect into kind of my local, what I call my Claude directory folder that has, everything that I'm working. And this goes down to different projects, contexts, docs, etc., and it can take all that in.
The thing I'm wanting to emphasize is that like most of the effort of building this was performed via you chatting with your agent through your Telegram messaging interface, and then it built dashboards and what we're going to go through now. So I just want to confirm that, yeah?
Yeah, 100%. And then what I would say, Alex, is that inspired, okay, what else do I need? And that kind of expanded the ecosystem, but it's all been done through Telegram.
Okay, let's go.
Okay, so this is the app that I built. Calling it this portion of it, it's the People tab, but calling it the Connections app for now. There's a couple other areas. So this is within the overall Chief of Staff project that I've been working. And when you're in the People tab, there's a couple things. One, the UI is meant to somewhat resemble, a messaging interface, but there's a couple of different areas. Again, it was, how do I stay in contact and better manage the network, friends, family, professional life? And so that started with an understanding of all my text messages, right? I have 176,000 text messages, which is really the basis for the app. And so the first step was, can I analyze those messages? So I extracted them, ran a script locally, and had OpenClaw, look at the file, do a full analysis on both my voice and then on my contacts and understand who's important based on all that history, and then ultimately categorize my contacts into a couple different buckets. And that was really kind of the starting point to actually get into the app. Yeah.
Yeah. First of all, you did the work that is required to connect OpenClaw to your iMessage. That's a couple of like piping steps.
Yeah. So that's where it gets interesting, which is I can't directly connect OpenClaw to iMessage, but locally I can run a script and extract the iMessages from kind of where it's locked down in Apple on my MacBook. And then I was able to upload those to Google Drive, and the Google Drive connection is how OpenClaw accessed.
And then, but OpenClaw built that script.
OpenClaw wrote the script. Yes. Yeah.
Exactly. So you're just like, hey, okay, I need to do this, and it's like maybe you should do it this way. You're like, oh, I don't think that works, and then you're having a negotiation with the entity, with the agent, and then finally the solution comes through. It works.
And it's interesting too, because I think, again, I mentioned I'm very curious. That comes across in how I speak and talk to the bot, right? Like I know I don't know a lot, so it's help me understand, what should we do? How do you think about this? And then it may give me an answer. And again, I might not know. It could be the best approach. It could not be. I don't know. So I would, and maybe a little less now because I know a little bit more. But even to this day, right? It's, if you're not totally sure, you ask it to clarify why shouldn't we do this, right? What are other options potentially, and allow it to continue to work. And I think that was very helpful in probably avoiding some, false positives, if you will. And so, just all back and forth. I think at this point, I don't know if it's 7,000 messages with Telegram at this point, which are, all back and forth between me and OpenClaw. So a lot of time spent back and forth learning, helping the bot the agent understand what I'm trying to do and get the help that's needed.
Okay.
And then
so we build the script, we dump the historical data. You do a processing on that to understand your voice. When you say your voice, you mean the way that you write, not your actual phonic voice.
Correct.
Let's continue.
Yeah. So once got kind of the core data, it was living in Google Drive, and then it was being pulled in and onto the VPS where OpenClaw lived and into a database. So as a Postgres, like a SQL database that was organizing all of that data. You could almost think of it as a little CRM, if you will. And then that was the kind of the back end of this app. And so once that structure was in place, it could be, hey, what can we do with this? Well, there's a couple different things.
And by the way, again, just for the less technical people, these are things which you kind of uncovered as you were doing this project and sort of like learning about, okay, we're going to do a database. Most people know what a database is. Let's know what the difference between Postgres or any kind of other database provider. So you made technical decisions under the advisement of the Claw and of like, obviously you have like some other ChatGPT, whatever sessions on the side that you're conversing with.
Yeah, and it's fair. Right now, I'm just thinking of all the things that I've learned, but it's true. I had no idea what really a Postgres database was, or a little bit of SQL, but not really. Like, how does it all connect? How do you like the vectors, right? So you're assigning different weights to different information, allowing an agent to be more efficient with search. And this is all like learned. And I don't even know if that is the proper definition, Alex, but you know enough to be dangerous. And then that unlocks a huge amount. But again, it's just the learning. A lot of Reddit as well, checking things, using, my other Claude instance, asking questions when really needed, but most of it's just back and forth with OpenClaw. So a database is built with all the iMessages. We kind of trained it on the way I write. And then it was, how do we categorize? So we broke into a couple different buckets. And then I guess before we jump in, kind of the last big task was, how do I think about who I should be how do I think about when I should be staying in contact with the different types of folks? And what I settled on, again, developed with the OpenClaw, with the agent, was looking at the time since the last interaction or the last message over the average time between messages for that specific contact. So they called it the gap ratio, which I'll go with. And I think there's probably a better way, or there could be an easier way to look at it. And you could kind of put a face on it. But that idea, I think, is important, because if you talk with someone a lot and you have a very close messaging relationship, it's going to surface that you need to reconnect with them more quickly because of that high level of engagement. Whereas if you connect, say, maybe once a month or once every 2 months, it's going to raise, hey, it's been 2 months. Now it's on your priority list. So it kind of allows you to manage your network kind of on the cadence that is typical. And then if you start engaging more, then that's going to change kind of what that average time is. And therefore, it can kind of accelerate your relationships if you are kind of following the system, if you will, if you choose to do that. So that's really the basis of the when. So that's kind of the backbone. There's a couple other things that we'll talk through, but I think maybe makes sense. I'll kind of go through and show the layout, kind of the different features, and some context for me as to how we got there, if that works. Okay, here's the app interface. And there's a couple different key areas. So I'll start actually with, there's a filter option. And this shows contacts by priority level. So my 3 levels are priority being number 1, important being number 2, and valued being a 3rd tier. And those are all represented by different colors on the kind of initial circle there. And again, this was all structured and recommended by OpenClaw based on the voice and messages and kind of how we built that formula, if you will. And then I'm able to go in and kind of manually adjust. I was surprised at how accurate it was. With kind of looking at all the messages, making the recommendation saying, these folks seem to be important to you. These are your really, your priority contacts, and here's some folks that you may want to continue to be in contact with. And it did a pretty accurate job, which again was surprising. So that's one way that I can look at the network. The other is by relationship. And so assigning different buckets, and some of these are assigned based on the different conversations, and the agent is doing a lot of that work. But again, I can, human in the loop can go and manage that as well. And so it gives a couple different ways to look at the data, which can be pretty powerful. I think the other component that helps with this, the idea is that if there's maybe a contact that I think about that's not necessarily in one of these tiers, I can search for them and they're still available, they're still visible, just not categorized. I can click into them, have all the same functionality, and I could add them as important. So a lot of flexibility of looking across the network. It also shows all the text messages, so I can look kind of through that history as well. So that is
I think that doing the deep dive, the data mining of your existing conversations and contacts is like telling you, okay, this is your current state. And equally powerful is also, okay, who would you like to be prioritizing more? Who would you like to be making sure that you're communicating with and keeping in contact with, right? And bubbling them up in the priority list.
Yeah, and the other thing too is you can take that database and what questions you have, right? You can drill in even deeper. To help kind of surface those. So based on kind of that initial work, but you can go back and really kind of understand at a deeper level some of your connections, right? And part of that formula was, seasonality. So there's folks that talk to kind of in these spurts, and that's a consideration with how important they are, right? Are you sending more messages over time and accelerating, or are you decelerating, right? And the formula weights all of that differently. But you can go and, again, huge database, ask questions. The agent can help surface that and identify maybe some people that you haven't thought about in a little bit, but you realize are really folks you want to be be close to and continue to build the relationship with. The core of the UI is structured into the needs attention and all contacts. And the needs attention for each priority group is tracked by that gap ratio, which is in orange. And so for, let's take Abby, in this case, she would be the number one contact that I need to connect with because she has the highest gap ratio. And what that means is the last message was sent 9 days ago, and that is 123 times greater than the average, right? So that's saying Abby and I talk a lot. And again, the data is a little funky for this demo, but Abby is my partner. And so it makes sense that we talk a lot, and that's what this high gap ratio number is representing versus, 29 days since Norman and I last talked, and that's 91x the average. So, don't talk quite as much. And then what's great
is he your bestie?
He is a good friend, and it's interesting too because we lived in the same building, so okay. A lot of interaction. And then I moved, and there's distance, and so that changes the dynamic. But if we didn't talk, for a long time, he would kind of work his way down the list. But again, it's that good reminder because distance, but I want to continue that relationship. And then as this is updated, this all is fluid, right? So Abby's here today. Maybe tomorrow it's someone else conceptually. And so this allows me to look at, okay, who do I need to talk to today? And it's relatively manual, right? But this can be push notifications, right? You can work it into kind of your day-to-day. It can be included. I have a morning brief that my agent sends, and that surfaces, hey, here's some folks you may want to connect with. So there's a lot you can do with this kind of as the base. So that's the kind of the different tiers, how the network is organized and the relationships are there. And then we get into the individual relationships. So in this case, let's take, I'll take Jason. And so there's a couple things. One, the white represents that I sent the last message, and then the gray, or sorry, the white is the contact sent the last message. The gray is that I sent the last message. And even better, I don't know, let's do Josh. So even though I've sent the last message, I want to stay in contact. 13 days was the last time we talked. And that's 51 times our, average. So again, someone I speak to quite a bit. A couple of things you can do. If I click on the circle with the initials, it opens up their full contact card, and it shows a few things. One, what priority they are, and I can quickly change that. It also shows the relationship, which I can change if I'd like. And then it also shows notes that I can edit if I want to update it. But these notes were created with that initial analysis by the agent. And so it provides that context, but I can go and update that. And then that also updates over time as messages continue. Then there's a recommendation, so lead with. So this will populate based on the message history, give an idea of what we could speak to or what I could send a message on. There's a worth knowing, which I think for the most part is how many messages and interactions have been tracked. And then it gives a few kind of here's the last messages, but you can expand that and see like an iMessage like view of the last 8 messages for reference. I can kind of catch up on that conversation all without opening up iMessage, which is helpful. So it's all kind of in the app. And then what's really powerful and part of the driver of this is what do I even say, right? So I've got this kind of initial recommendation. There's been some analysis, but there is still that barrier in my mind. I don't know if this is unique to me, but it's like, man, I've fallen behind. I want to re-engage. I want it to be positive. What's the best way to do that? And so I have a draft feature in this app, which is connected both to like a local model, but it's also connected into Anthropic and Claude. So the local model runs locally on a machine that I have, and it's for kind of simple text messages. It's a smaller model, and then for anything that's complex or longer, some folks have 3 different topics going in one one message, I can draft a larger, kind of more complex response using Claude. So you click draft, and it's going to write the draft. And then, while that loads, some of this work can be done overnight. So, I can have OpenClaw, runs a cron, you can populate all the text for XYZ people. 5 people in my priority list that I should talk to, populates it overnight, so you don't even have to wait for that creation. So this is the output. Again, I do use emojis, and so it kind of represents the voice, provides me a draft that I can
OpenClaw.
Yeah, we're in an AI group together. So I can edit this draft, right? And if I were to say, I don't know, I delete part of it, that then goes back into the database and is used to continue to learn how I.
Interesting.
So that's a really huge, I think, help is the idea of continuous learning. And this really came, again, just through the conversations where it was like, oh, aha, as you're training on the voice, it's like, how is that ongoing? And what can we do so it's continuing to iterate? And that was kind of the recommendation, put it back into the database, have it run versus the original. And it's essentially, real training, just as you would train the model on your voice, you're
100%.
doing that over time. So that's the local, the quick, and then you can also do the detailed, which will come up and probably give a little bit more of a comprehensive prompt. And while that is pulling up, the other feature is if there's been a phone call in the last 14 days, there is a box that pops up that I could input like, hey, we talked about XYZ, so it could include that in the draft.
Mm-hmm.
And so just, again, linking some additional data into the database. So here you go. Gives a different draft, a little bit longer. Again, I can edit it. I can just refresh it. But the big unlock is, and I don't know if we'll fully be able to see it, but I can copy and text. And then, oh, there you go. And it opens his card. I can paste and then send. All from, the app. So I think there's a way that I can actually, it pre-populates into iMessage and don't even have to click paste. I've learned that is possible, but it's to make it as easy as possible to, what can I say? How can I engage? And then be able to do that, with the people that you want to. So it's been a big help of, getting me over the hump. Which is very self-inflicted maybe, but it also kind of makes it fun, right? And uncovers things maybe you haven't thought about in a while, or conversations you've had that you otherwise wouldn't, going back and scrolling through the messages, you wouldn't necessarily pick up.
Yeah, it's bringing up all kinds of ethical dilemmas, synthesizing a message to your mother about how much you love her and miss her. And we're going to have to find guidelines and guardrails around those kinds of questions. But at least it's helping, right? It's helping with human connection and helping us keep the hooks in and keep connected.
Yeah, 100%. And that's the other thing too, is you could tailor, what those rules are, because this is all driven by a prompt, right? So just like, we put in a prompt into OpenClaw or into, Claude, there is a backend prompt that has, here's essentially the different rules, the guidance, the guardrails of what that draft should be creating. So even to the length, right? How many tokens should it be? What's the ideal time that the draft should populate, right? Which also kind of helps with some of the thinking. And you could create that, hey, no drafts to my mother. If you will, or I only want to talk about these 3 things, or don't, talk about XYZ. That can all be tailored, which is great. So you can kind of customize it for, even if it's different groups, right? Like if it's a professional contact, don't XYZ, right? If it's a friend, if it's a more casual relationship, this is okay. So you could really get very granular depending on what you want that output to be.
Could you give us a tour of some of your diagrams that you made? How did you make those diagrams actually?
Yeah. So that's the core of the app. So I think those are kind of the core features, and again, how it can be tailored and customized. So let me stop sharing here.
Corp, so simple and so powerful. Checking your contacts. Who did you message at what frequency historically? And that's your kind of, what did you call it? Your gap metric kind of thing?
The gap measure. And what I've talked about recently is, is that the best way to look at it? Or it could be, you usually message every 7 days. Your last message was 14 days ago, right? And so that would be essentially a number associated with that, but you can make that a little bit easier to consume, if you wanted to. And so that's in consideration as well. Okay, so what I'm going to share now is kind of an overall eye chart, but I think conceptually it's helpful for folks to understand. So again, this is what is called the mermaid chart, which is a charting way of showing different connections for, the digital world, if you will, is my understanding.
And so how did you make this?
Yeah. So this was I understood I came to learn what a mermaid chart was. And I think most people have probably seen them, right? Which is, it looks very technical. There's kind of the buckets. And so that to me, I'd asked Claude to create a, diagram, but it was more fun colors, and it wasn't quite as just bare bones and technical as I wanted. And I came across what's called the mermaid chart, and I was like, oh, well, why don't I try to make one of those? And so it was with OpenClaw, back and forth of let's make sure we know all the systems, everything we've built, and then create a mermaid chart. And so it gave essentially code. And then I went to, I think it's mermaidlive.com, where I could input that code and it would output the mermaid chart.
Okay.
And again, that was all learned just in conversation. And so a couple iterations of that to get it so I could kind of understand it, and it looked, good to me. And this was kind of the output. It's a little dated now, but I think the overall premise of going from not knowing a whole lot to then building.
Zoom in and kind of walk us through the flow. Yeah.
So that's the high level starting on the left. And is this big enough, or?
Even way bigger, actually.
Okay, way bigger. Okay.
Yeah, like that. Okay, yeah, here we are.
So a couple things. This is how I access the ecosystem, primarily through my iPhone, right? And then there's a couple different areas. So Telegram, again, I said this was a little dated based on the number of messages. So it shows you just how quickly some of that interaction is. So there's a couple things. Through Telegram is the main way I access the ecosystem. There is also the web app, which is actually what we were just looking at, which is my chief of staff. So Aaron's bot chief of staff is the domain that I have. So, kind of fun to set up, but that's a core element of where I want to be spending time, is within that app, email, contacts, etc. And then from Telegram, I'm connecting with my OpenClaw, who is living on the VPS your way. And then there's, I guess we'll go up to here. So what drives OpenClaw? And this is kind of foundational. And I'm going to recommend a podcast episode that I think is gave me the best understanding of how does OpenClaw actually work and what do you need to make it as effective as possible. And that core element is, what are all the .md files? And MD is Markdown. It's a it's a formatted plain text file that is really efficient for an AI, in this case OpenClaw, to consume. And so, you may feed a Word document into Claude and it can parse it, pull it apart. But it's more efficient if it's just a plain text file. And so each of these kind of core elements of OpenClaw contain different things about me and about the rules that guide it. And so there's, the user, that's about me. There's the soul, which is personality, voice, rules. There's memory, which is everything that I want it to know at the beginning of each session. And this is kind of the long-term memory. So it consumes these when we begin to chat, every day. And then there's also the memory log. And so now it's every 30 minutes, our conversations, OpenClaw, the agent is saving all of what we're discussing, summarizing it, and building that context. So conceptually, over time, it knows you better. It can become, more accurate, more helpful because it has more context. And you've got to manage that, right? Because it can only consume so much at one time. But you have that history to help kind of make that memory persistent. And then there's the agents.md, which is kind of its operating manual. And so for me, I've structured different authority tiers of where it can, be autonomous, where it should escalate, and the things that it shouldn't, do. So it's kind of a variation on some of what's included in the user MD. So these files live, on the VPS. Everything is backed up because I'm afraid of losing something, but you can take this and you could give it to any other agent. And, it knows you pretty well. Here's what I'll say. To get here, what I actually did before kind of OpenClaw, I was thinking of kind of what are some of these, possibilities just in Cloud. I was like, oh, what can I create? I think it was after Abby had shared, hey, there's, Playa is, doing this hackathon. I think that's when it kind of triggered of, okay, what could I go build, with an agentic kind of view. And so I started building essentially a master prompt of what this chief of staff agent could be. And so that was back and forth with Claude of, hey, I want to build this. And it was 3 days of back and forth recommendations, asking questions. And it built this, massive about me and what I want out of this tool. And then when I got OpenClaw up and running, I essentially took that, fed it to OpenClaw. It broke down that master prompt into these different files, which is kind of its operating system, and gave that from day one a really effective, everything I want to do, all the rules. And so it knows me the minute I talk. So that was a really powerful.
That's important.
Yeah, huge. The foundation and the podcast does a great job of kind of outlining that and why, because the understanding I think is so critical because that's all relevant to any agentic AI. And OpenClaw is kind of led in that space. And I think kind of everyone else is kind of following. So there's also what it's calling some intelligence, capabilities. And again, I don't know if this all fully kind of articulates some things, but again, the voice model is a component of it. The voice model isn't necessarily captured in full in the .md files. So there's, a significantly larger voice file that it can reference.
Excuse me, now we're talking about voice as in actual voice.
Voice as in
voice
written voice.
Oh, yeah, written voice. Okay.
So but the same principle, if you were to go and create a speech agent, you would do the same thing with your physical voice. That idea of kind of training it is something you do, but this is all written. So a couple different buckets there. That is what AB, we'll call him that, has access to. And then from there on the back end, it's what does the agent connect to? How does he build? How does he access all my information that ultimately feeds some of these different tools and feeds my morning briefing? And the first step there was the OAuth server. So the way OpenClaw is set up today on the VPS is it uses Composio. And Composio is a tool that has a bunch of different, I think we'll call it MCP connections, which is the something context protocol. And essentially what that allows to do, the way I've heard it is, every software platform, speaks in a different language, right? Gmail speaks in one way, Outlook speaks another, et cetera. And what Anthropic has done is said, hey, can we standardize that connection so that the agents can speak just English, if you will, to all the different systems and make that efficiently integrate? And so Composio allows for all those different connections. In working with the bot and kind of going down this path, it was recommending, hey, based on what you want to do and how you want to design this, and you really want to build this big ecosystem, it may be better to get off of Composio and actually create our own auth server because you have a domain right? You can host it, essentially become self-hosted. And so this auth server allows me to connect to Gmail, Outlook, anything with like an API token lives on my server. So what Composio would offer and manage, essentially I do that on this.
And I just want to just zoom out for a second again. We're going into technical stuff, but you came into this whole world as a non-techie and you were just gently guided along. What was your comfort zone level about the technical stuff, decisions that you were making?
Yeah, it wasn't very good. If I'm being honest, because it's a language in and of itself, and it's a language I wasn't familiar with. And I think as I started to understand and ask, like, what is it? Like, help me understand it. Then I became significantly more comfortable, right? But it was just that back and forth. And it's like learning anything new, ask a ton of questions. And in this case, you get like an immediate response. And so you can learn.
So I think there's something important to sit on there, which is like getting into this state where you're in conversation, in collaboration, on a journey, moving things forward, making decisions, deploying, shipping solutions, ideas, codes that are bringing you towards the original objective of managing your complex network of relationships and everything.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because that was the genesis, right? And then as you go down and you have these conversations, it may recommend different things you haven't thought about. And so very quickly, it's kind of like, I haven't thought about that, right?
Yeah.
So that kind of is how I ultimately ended up here, because I had that one idea. And then that kind of feathered into a lot of different routes.
And that's something that Mark was talking about yesterday. He's another one of the inspirational stories. He's got different focus groups that he can apply to different problems, especially so like you have an idea in your head of what you want to do. Between you and me, it might not be the best idea. And along the way, you do need to be double checked, fact checked. Hey, did you think about this? What about that? Adding the critique. How did you do critiquing in this flow actually? Did you do any critiquing?
Yeah, so it took me longer than maybe it should have to be like, oh, I can spin up a sub agent to check some of this work. If that's where you're going, right? Because it's like, it's available. And what I found is my agent was really good, right? And so I never, like I would question things, but always seemed to make sense. And then I'm trying to think of so there was a kind of a separate project. It was putting together a many page kind of document, and it's a big meaty topic, and I ran it through just, hey, execute this task, and the result was not great. And what I essentially came to learn, right, is it was too much context for it to process. And so then the next pass was 8 sub-agents, each having its own little area. And then my OpenClaw AB was kind of project managing that and then doing the final review after the last agent, which was a risk management agent, to go through and like assess, does this all, like, is there any major risk that should be flagged? And then it went up to AB for the final review. So, just like you could have an agent check the work, the idea of using sub-agents to get a better outcome, I think, is very much the same in that example. And so now kind of everything I'm doing, especially on the building side, right, that's getting fed to an agent who is reviewing and flagging anything that may need a second look. So if we keep going, let me go up. I'll go from the OAuth server into what are the external services to start. And so these are some of the external services. So I mentioned, like, it's all connected via API. So for AB to have access to this, managed through the OAuth server, which allows the syncing of all the different cloud applications. And again, Microsoft and Google, I have my Aura Ring connected in. So I can look at that data. I'm sure that's not for some people, but I'm like, it exists somewhere already. I don't think it's too much risk. But that's really cool because you can build, an app on that. There's also HubSpot is linked into that. And then Authored Up, which is like LinkedIn analysis, isn't directly into OAuth, but it still falls within that and is kind of used across some of these capabilities.
Did you integrate your Aura data with your human connection app?
It's been in my daily briefing, which is part of that, like, but not specific to the connections. But
Okay.
there's a lot you could do. I think the example I'd give is the idea that kind of started working. There's many of them. But I also have Abby's data. So we can look across, what are our different measures? How did we sleep? What's our readiness score? And the thought there was we could integrate with Gmail, right? And Outlook. And so do you have a really stressful week? Have you had a really stressful day? Did you sleep not great? To get like a green, yellow, red on having any difficult or serious conversation, which is kind of like, hey, it's a little bit funky today. Let me get a good night's rest. Tomorrow the calendar is a little bit more clear. Like I'm just stressed today. That's just scratching the surface of what you could do.
Beautiful.
So in the last segment of the call, I would just like to ask Aaron to share. Okay, so he's built a lot of tooling, a lot of beautiful innovation and human connection technology. What has this actually done for you in your life? Has it made a difference?
So I think historically I have been not afraid, maybe that's over the word, but it's been an easy thing to put off because of the feeling of complexity of going through thinking of who do I need to connect with, who do I want to connect with, what did we even talk about last, like where do they exist? And so it's allowed me every day, I can wake up, first I get my daily briefing of here's a recommendation of folks that you may want to connect with. And then I open up my app and I can very immediately see all the people that are most important to me and who I can connect with today, and I can do it really easily. And so what that's resulted in is, I would say, a clear mind. There's no backlog right now of folks that I want to be in contact with, or I feel I should reach out to, et cetera. Like I have gone through and I've been able to reach out to all of those people, and it's freeing. One, because they seem to be very excited about that reconnection in a way that maybe I didn't fully appreciate that they would be. And so that's kicked off a number of conversations I've seen, even the last, it's really only been a month. I've seen someone that, I hadn't seen in years because of that, of going through the list. And I'm a big believer that, one interaction can have a huge impact on someone's life. And you just never know, what they're going through or time and place. And so that I think has probably been the biggest, my mind is free and I'm building, building the relationships where I want to, and what are important. So I don't have it's a good question on number of messages within this. But kind of where I see this going is continuing to figure out how do I integrate the data, more data, LinkedIn, et cetera, both for managing my network, but then what are the possibilities and who within that network may have some connection, who could be introduced. And so you can really kind of scale, your impact in whatever way that is, whatever domain maybe you're focusing on.
One thing I'm hearing, you have a feeling of calmness that you're on top of your stuff. And there's also another feeling of the response that you're getting from people that you're connecting to, that feeling of warmth and kind of energy. Is that an accurate read?
It's a super accurate read, right? And then I think when you're not maybe burdened by some of those things, or you're not thinking about those, what else can you be thinking of related to building connection or otherwise? And it just kind of elevates that level of living. And again, I think this is probably scratching the surface of what can be done. And so I'm excited to kind of continue to ideate, and especially, in a global world, right? Even us, I think 8-hour difference right now. Those relationships can be even harder to manage, right?
Yeah, so one thing that I can say is that Playa AI is very interested in supporting you with releasing this and allowing other people, including myself, to use it, to benefit from it, to foster human connection. This will be our second human connection technology. And the first one was first interaction, setting the stage for getting to know each other. This one here is more about nurturing and kind of cultivating your people. So thank you so much. I really in awe of what you've done, and happy happy to be a part of the story. Any parting words?
I'm excited to, so one, thank you. And then making it more accessible, right? A little complex today, but we've got a path forward on how do we make that more manageable, where you don't need maybe all the ecosystem, but it can run mostly from your phone. So I think there's a path there, which would make it kind of more accessible. So working towards building that as the next phase.